Hello, my name is Michael and I'm a composer of classical music. There are many famous examples of pieces of music that have been given a title. For example, Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, or Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, which conjures up the idyll of the countryside, and another example would be Vaughan Williams' London Symphony, which brings to mind Edwardian London and carriages and trotting horses and the like. And so it's actually quite common to listen to a piece of music in a pictorial way, shall we say, rather than an analytical way. When I was first embarking on learning about music, my first main teacher was very keen on my listening to things in an analytical way. But it was a funny one, actually, because I found that while I sat there listening, oh, the cellos are doing that, and isn't that clever? The flutes have done that, which mimics something that was done by the bassoon. I did find that in a way it took some enjoyment out of my listening compared with when with an old Dansette record player I will put on an album and just wallow in the beauty and power and emotion of the piece. So what this is bringing me on to is a few words about a piece of mine that does have a very strong connection. It's called Tales from the 15th Floor, and it's for cello and piano. So first of all, I'm going to describe the opening in a musical way. And the cello starts alone with a phrase that is made up of three notes, da-da-dum, and then it jumps, da-dum, and then it falls, da-da-dum. So what's that, 8 notes in all. It then repeats it, and the only difference really is that the third of those sub-phrases is extended. So da-da-dum, da-dum, da-da-da-dee-dum-bum. So it does that. Now the third time it happens, it takes one of the little sub-phrases and jumps much further, da-da-dum, and then from that height it can fall, da-da-dum, da-dee-da-dum. And please excuse my musical description. It's a good job I'm not singing this. And you'll hear towards the end then that the music increases its power and maybe tension or drama by bringing in some very low notes of the cello at the same time. And this opening is then closed by a very loud chord on the piano. So let's have a listen.
11 tells one opening. Done. Button. Play. Button. Files. List. Button.
So now let me tell you a story of something that happened to me at the end of 1976. On Christmas morning, I was alone in my flat in Hammersmith, about aged 28, and 29, and I lifted a cup of coffee to my mouth, and to my surprise, it sailed past my ear instead of coming to my mouth. I would add that I felt dreadful. I'd had a really bad dose of flu. My whole body ached. And so I called the doctor and couldn't get there because they were closed till after New Year. I could still drive then and went off to a hospital, and being Christmas, they just thought I'd drunk too much and said, actually take aspirin or paracetamol. Anyway, 3 or 4 days later, I staggered along the Fulham Palace Road, holding on to lampposts and sandwich boards, and took myself to A&E. And that afternoon, a lumbar puncture told me that I had a very rare virus called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which, if you get it very badly, does paralyze you and can paralyze you totally, and that you end up in intensive care. So over the next day or two, my body was seizing up, and I do remember on New Year's night, I staggered to the window of 10 South, very high up in Charing Cross Hospital in Fulham, and just looking at the view, and whether there was a firework or two, I don't know. And then suddenly my legs gave away and I fell to the floor, and that was almost the last thing I could remember. So let's play the music again and just see whether it feels any different with what I was trying to depict with the music, the confusion, the drama, and that last fall to the floor.
List, button. 11 tails done, button. Play, button.
So I won't say any more about the first movement because there would be totally false connections. And so the piece, yes, much lively and driven, and then the first movement closes with a reiteration of that cello opening. So the second movement, the work is 3 movements in all, really depicted in my mind intensive care. And intensive care, where I was for just over 4 months, is an odd place in that there are lots of different feelings and atmospheres all at the same time. I was mostly unconscious, but every so often I was brought back to reality, shall we say, and I would communicate with the nurses by a nurse would say the alphabet A, B, C, D, E, and I would blink my eyes when I'd got the letter that I wanted to spell the word. And actually, it sometimes became a very quick means of communication. Occasionally, I had visitors that would come in and see me, and that was quite bizarre because lying there with a tracheotomy, you cannot speak, and so you just listen to people who give accounts of their lives. And some of the things always reminded me, sort of felt rather trivial when you're lying there thinking, oh, well, I'm not bothered about the colour of the wallpaper you're struggling on, but I wouldn't mind breathing, really. But anyway, the atmosphere of intensive care, there's of course sadness, there's sorrow, but there's loneliness as well, which was a feature. But also there is a kind of stillness and a quiet, peaceful movement, which then can actually explode into tension when something really life-threatening is happening. So it was actually a very, very interesting place to be. And it was really odd how gradually you were institutionalized and normalized. So here we are. I'm going to play the opening of the second movement, and it's introduction by the piano on its own now, which is mirroring that opening of the cello on its own. And then you hear the cello come in with the first figure. And what an instrument to evoke that mournful, sad, but beautiful feel.
Play button. Files list button.
Beautiful and sensitive playing by cellist Karen Stevenson and pianist Sophia Rahman. I won't play it here, but it's funny, as I was saying at the beginning, that the title or the connection with the idea then starts to create images. And much later on in that ICU intensive care movement, the players took a passage of pizzicato cello and the piano much slower than what I'd intended. And it was amazing after hearing the first take of the recording that it just reminded me of the gentle bleeping of the machines in the silence of intensive care. And I certainly didn't intend it, but it was there. And it kind of, yes, if that helps the listening or aids the listening experience, then great. But if it doesn't, it really doesn't matter. So on to the third movement, and I had returned to a musical structure, and here I used a rondo, and it had three sort of episodes and interludes. But here I did actually make a very specific connection to what the experience of being in hospital in that way was. By this time, I had realized that I had lost most of my eyesight in one of the waking movements. I could hardly see anything at all. But one of the real characteristics of the period was intense hallucinations, which were pretty horrific, I would have to say. Once I was almost like Batman, where I'd jumped out the hospital and skimmed along the Thames to go to the theatre in London and then flew back and had trouble getting back to the hospital. And but as my chances of survival deteriorated, one of the worst, and I think round about the time my parents were called in because it looked like I wouldn't get through it, for some odd reason, Frank Sinatra was trying to kill me. And so, as a basis of this third movement, I used the opening of Frank Sinatra's New York, New York, because it's a kind of rhythm that can be made into quite an angular, mysterious, almost kind of threatening way, which he was certainly doing to me. However, I'm going to end very positively because the very last hallucination was really odd in the sense that I was in a very large atrium, like the of a museum or something like that. And there were some massive stone pillars at the end, and it's very crowded with people walking in and out between these columns. And every now and again, a huge block of concrete between these columns would smash down and kill whoever was walking in or out. Whereas if the people had chosen the column next door, they would walk happily through and on. I had a feeling that by this time I had realized that I could kind of mentally stay in intensive care. As I said, I was totally institutionalized, felt at home, or I could make a break for freedom. And I did walk through the column and did survive and live to tell the tale. So here is the end of Tales from the 15th Floor, and you'll hear that it ends very happily and contentedly, and my life, or my new life, was about to begin.
Play button. Files list button.
Well, it was a long road back. I came out of intensive care early to mid-May of 1977. I was still totally paralyzed, and had permanently lost most of my eyesight. But one day I could just suddenly move a shoulder, and then a week or two later, I could almost raise my arm. And so I kind of sat there like this, and gradually, with physiotherapy and occupational therapy, I began to move again, and eventually went for months and months in rehabilitation. And eventually, a year and a half later, even went to a hand specialist to try and play my musical instrument again. Yeah, it was a tough process, and it took about 10 years before the pain from that experience really went away. But it was so enriching. It changed my life. I was left with a feeling of peace after hospital that I have never experienced either before, or I wish I had that sense now. And it led to many things that wouldn't have happened without that illness, in particular, my move into composition.